So I created this Venn diagram to sort of just show a different way of categorizing the 12 signs than perhaps we would normally think of them. And basically, it's just by their depiction. The word zodiac literally means animal. And, most of the constellations represent animals or people. They can be objects or mythological creatures or beasts. Um, Typically animals, though, that's like the standard. And so if you look at what each zodiac sign is represented by, it's not just random, it's not just a coincidence. It's actually genius. Like the whoever came up with the 12 signs and their representations is kind of genius because there are so many different ways of interpreting that can give you insight on each sign just by what they're represented by. Okay. And so basically, like I said, those word zodiac means animal. So most of the signs are represented by animals, although some are represented as different kinds of people, and some, only a couple, are represented by objects. And then I also included a fourth category, which is angels, and I'll explain that in a minute. That might sound a little bit weird, but it's true. um, and yeah, so I just thought it was kind of interesting. Basically, so I'm just gonna go through the reason why would some signs be represented by animals and some be represented as people or objects. Basically, what it is that um, all the signs represented by animals are very instinctive, and um, they're more having to do with like urges and emotions and uh, emotional intelligence and instincts. They're very instinctive. They could have like instinctive timing, that sort of thing. The signs represented by people are all more intellectual, more analytical, and there's no like one is not better than the other. The signs represented by animals, have those priceless instincts where they could react to things, just the right way at just the right time. That perhaps the signs represented by people, the signs represented by people might be lacking of those animalistic instincts, but then where they excel is in their insight and their analytical ability. Okay, and then the signs represented by objects are objective, so they can detach to the extent that they almost remove themselves from the situation. They're relatively unemotional. They do have emotions, but they're not nearly as obvious as the signs represented by animals. The signs represented by objects are objective, detached. They can, and that is a strength. The con would be that again they really lack those instincts, or they might lack the emotional intelligence or the emotional abilities um, that the animalistic signs have. But where they excel is being detached and seeing things truly objectively as they are. That can be valuable in itself, or being able to remove yourself from the situation, have that sort of scientific perspective, I guess you could say. And then, so of course, you'll notice it's a Venn diagram, so there's a lot of overlap. So, for instance, Sagittarius is in between animals and people, and that's pretty obvious if you look at they're represented by the centaur. Centaur is half man or human, half animal, half horse. So, Sagittarius is gifted but also challenged with the instincts and animalistic urges of a beast or an animal, but also the rational ability and intellectuality of a human. And if you look at centaurs in Greek mythology, they were very bestial and very belligerent, and they would run around the forest and be super drunk and sometimes rapey, and just kind of, they were party animals. And if you look at Sagittarius, you'll see that party animal energy where they like to just get rowdy and crazy, and they like chaos. But then they also do have that analytical ability. Sagittarius is an intellectual sign, it's philosophical. So that's where there's this, they'd have all those urges and all that passion, but then they also have the intellectuality to temper it. And a huge challenge to manage all of that, but it's also a gift. They're extremely versatile. And even with the centaurs in Greek mythology, although most were belligerent and drunk and whatnot, a few were extremely intellectual and they were scholars and they taught. I think it was like Homer or Aristotle. I honestly don't remember, but some of them were tutors to humankind, and they were actually very cultured and civilized and intelligent. And that's why Sagittarius rules morality, because they have both the urges, as well as the rationale to make good of them, or to control them. Okay, so yeah, so you can read a lot just from that. And then, okay, some more overlap areas. I included angels within people because basically, so I guess within the angel category, since I haven't talked about that, I put Virgo and Aquarius, and you might be thinking like, really, Virgo and Aquariuses are they're angels? But yeah, actually, there's a reason behind that. It's not to say that like, oh, Virgo and Aquarius are so enlightened and they're like above everybody. It's not like that at all. It's just that a lot of times they're just represented by people. Virgo is the maiden, Aquarius is the water bearer. A lot of times they're just normal people, but sometimes they are represented with wings, and there's a reason for that, because both Virgo and Aquarius. Well, okay, so if you look at what angels supposedly come down from another dimension, or they come down from above and they help humans, supposedly, right? So they come down from a higher level to give their guidance or knowledge. And so if you look at Virgo and Aquarius, both 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 have purposes involving helping others. And the downside of that, the like less evolved side of that, would be, Virgo and Aquarius are known for giving their unsolicited opinion, which can be really annoying, and they can end up just sounding really critical, and that just bothers everyone else, and it sounds like they are know-it-alls and like they're so perfect. That's the unevolved side of it. But the evolved side would be that, they actually could be compassionate and truly want to help others, that they are either helping others who are less fortunate than they are, or teaching, giving information to those who have maybe not that same knowledge that they do, for whatever reason. So that's why they're represented by angels. It's not a morality thing. It's not that they're better than any other signs. It's just that they have to do with helping others, basically. And both are in the people category. And at this point, I've talked about all the signs in the people category, except for Gemini, which is the only one that's just normal, just straight up people. They're not angels. They're not half animal. Um, Gemini is just a people sign. They're just the twins. It's just, the twins. They're just people. So that's pretty simple. And it's I feel like even that in itself tells you a lot, because a lot of times Gemini is said to be the sign of humanity, of people. Gemini is the sign that most represents humanity as a whole. Gemini is intelligent, it's social, it's fickle, it changes its mind a lot, it can be forgetful, it's always focused on the present. So if you look at humankind in history, we have a lot in common with Gemini. Gemini is social, it likes to figure things out, it likes to invent things. So it makes sense they're definitely the people sign. All Gemini, Virgo, Aquarius, and Sagittarius are all intellectual, as I said, but Gemini is the one that just most represents people. Um, they could be vain and self-focused, but also focused on other people. Very social, very complex socially. They're always wanting to know, what the latest gossip or news is. So it kind of says a lot about people, about humanity as a whole, as a species. Okay, and then I put Aquarius in the overlap between objects and people, just because, not because they're robots, even though they do have a connection with robots, but basically it's just because, so Aquarius is the water bearer. It's represented as, like its name suggests, it's usually a person holding a vase of water. They are the person bearing the water. But a lot of times it's just represented as a vase. Um, and and I think even that says something about its the nature of the sign. Because although Aquarius is intellectual and it does kind of fit in with these other people signs, it's also very objective. I would say Aquarius is more objective and detached than Virgo, Gemini, or Sagittarius. And so the fact that it is sometimes, even though the name is water bearer, which like would suggest that it's the person holding the water, it could have been represented as just water or just a vase. But Aquarius doesn't mean water, it doesn't mean vase, it means water bearer, so which implies a person. However, just the fact that it is so often represented as just the vase and that Aquarius is so objective just makes a lot of sense to me. Aquarius, along with Libra, are represented by objects. Libra is the only sign whose name translates to scales, which is not, it's inanimated. It's not an animal or a person at all. A scales, it's just an object. So Libra and Aquarius are both, I would say, the most scientific in the in the fact that they are very detached. Libra in particular, a lot of times we could forget and we can think Libra is this bubbly, very feminine sign, very social sign, very chatty, and they can be very sentimental. But sort of under that is actually a very objective, rational mind, and Saturn is exalted in Libra. So in many ways, Libra is actually the most detached sign, the most scientific potentially, because Libra rules the scales, and with the scales, you're weighing two things. They're always weighing, thinking like, is it this way or that way? Is the situation this way or is it that way? But in doing so, they remove themselves from the situation. They're thinking about this thing or that thing, and that removes themselves from the situation. They're not thinking about themselves. Or if they are thinking about themselves, they're thinking about themselves in relation to another person or another thing. They're putting themselves on the scales. So it's always either themselves and someone else, or just two other people, or two other situations, or two other concepts. So again, like I said, because of that, they're removing themselves from the situation. They're becoming extremely detached by doing that. It sets up this sort of split within the personality, which, and again, that can have that could be a challenge and a gift. If you're constantly weighing between two options, you'll never make a decision. You'll never take that first step. And you could sort of splinter your own personality. But on the other hand, there's a lot of worth in weighing things like that. You can become very rational, objective, scientific. You could see things as they really are by being so unbiased, or, not letting your own personality color your judgment. So Libra along with Aquarius are the most objective, basically. And what else? I guess I could talk a little bit more about Aquarius. So the fact that they're the water bearers, so they aren't the water. Water represents emotion, intelligence, but it's the sort of intelligence that's like psychic intelligence, or like, wisdom or knowledge. It's wisdom it's more of like an emotional wisdom. Water is basically emotion. So Aquarius is an air sign. They're not very emotional, but they hold the emotion. In other words, Aquarius is compassionate, as I mentioned before. So they, through their deeds and their compassion, they conjure up emotion or water in others. They do deeds which bring about compassion and emotion, and through their scientific analysis and their knowledge, it leads to spiritual enlightenment, which you could say is like a water. It leads to soulfulness. Okay, so that's why people get that confused. Aquarius is not a water sign. They're very unemotional relative to other signs, but they conjure up that emotion. There is a connection between Aquarius and water for sure. Okay, and so I haven't talked about the animal signs, and so these are just the basic animals, right? No, but So yeah, they're the most instinctive, and some of these signs are they could be very logical as well. They can be very intelligent, you know. So it's not saying that they're not intelligent, like the people or the object signs. They could be very intelligent for sure. It's just that they're more instinctive, I like to say. And you could kind of, since we have 1, 2, 7 here, so that's a little bit over half the whole Zodiac plus Sagittarius. So you got most of the signs here, and I could have even broken this down more into more categories. Um, they're all instinctive. They all sort of navigate. Even the ones that are very intelligent, they're not so much analyzing everything and thinking if one equals two equals three or A to B to C. They're not like analyzing everything to such an extent. A lot of times they're navigating the world through their emotional intelligence. They're just feeling like, what does this situation feel like to me, or what does this person feel like to me? It's that emotional sense, and that could be common sense. That could be very smart for sure, but it by its nature it is an emotional intelligence. So that's different than the analytical abilities that maybe Gemini or Virgo might have. Okay. And that's not to say that just because you're one of the animal signs, you can't analyze things. I'm just saying that just the fact that the sign is represented by an animal implies that there's generally more of a focus on the emotional sense, which could be very valuable for sure. And like I said, I could have subdivided this more. I find it really interesting that all the fire signs are represented by mammals. Aries and Leo are both animals. They're both mammals. I guess people are animals too, technically. I'm just comparing and contrasting humans versus the rest of animals, I guess, for this exercise. But with the fire signs, Aries and Leo, Ram and Leo and Lion, they're both animals, both mammals, and then Sagittarius is a combination of human and horse, and it's not real, but if it was real, it would be a mammal since horses and humans are both mammals. So that's kind of interesting. And then also that with the earth signs are also all mammals. Sort of. I guess Capricorn is half goat, half fish, so that would be half mammal. And that almost is like an in between earth and water in a way, which I could talk about more in a second. But I just find it interesting that all the fire and the earth signs are basically mammals. And I think for us as people, mammals are sort of they're the animals that are easiest to relate to. The ones that we think are cute are usually mammals. They're the most accessible to us, like mentally speaking. So I would interpret that as the fire and the earth signs are the most like easy to relate to, the most kind of like standard or easy to understand. Like Aries and Leo especially are very easy to relate to, very easy for us to understand. Usually a lot of times they could be celebrities or actors because they're so personable and they're so expressive. They are very forthright with their emotions, and so it's easy for us to understand them and to relate to them. Same with the Taurus to some extent. They're very, I think they're one of the easier signs to understand and to relate to. So I think the fact that fire and earth are the more like physical signs. Air and water get sort of less dense and more intangible and more abstract. That's kind of why I would see that the fire and the earth signs have to have this connection with mammals. And then if you look at the water signs, I want to say they're all invertebrates, but I know Pisces, which is fish. Fish is a vertebrate. They have backbones, I think. I don't think crabs have. I think they're an invertebrate, but it's beside the point. So Scorpio is obviously the scorpion. Pisces is the fish. Cancer is the crab. None of them are mammals. They're all either invertebrates or fish. Again, is technically a vertebrate, but they're all sort of maybe more obscure animals to us as humans. Also, I find it interesting. So the crab and the fish are obviously water creatures primarily, and they're of the water element as signs. But then also, for millions of years, scorpions actually came from the ocean, and they primarily existed in the ocean for millions and millions of years. For most of Earth's history, there were periods where the world's waters, where the world's oceans were dominated by massive sea scorpions. So I just find it interesting. I feel like whoever came up with this whole astrological setup must have had some prehistorical knowledge of prehistoric animals, because it's just so interesting that the scorpion represents a water sign. So and again, so the three water signs are represented by, in that sense, with what I just said, they're represented by aquatic animals. And again, like I said, they're more obscure. They're not mammals. They're not as relatable. Like water signs are often more withdrawn, or there's more of like a hidden element to them. The water element in itself has to do with things that aren't easily understood, or things that are more abstract or spiritual, or non-physical in nature. Uh, Again, like I said, water represents emotions. Emotions in themselves are not physical. You can't point to me and see, like, explain an emotion maybe as easily or as physically as other concepts like fire or earth concepts, would be more easily understood in that aspect, that they could be more physically explained. So the water signs are almost, slightly not of this world. They can tap into other realities and such. And so it's kind of, you could kind of say that the water animals are not of our world, that they're slightly in another world, so to speak. And then again, just to touch on Capricorn, Capricorn is the sea goat. The word Capricorn does not literally translate as sea goat. It translates to goat horn, but the depiction of Capricorn is always a creature which is half goat, half fish, basically. So that's why I put sea goat. But so again, like I touched on earlier, Capricorn is a mammal. It's a goat, but then it has the body of a fish, so it sort of, I feel like that kind of hints at the nature of Capricorn, that perhaps, they're definitely very earthy, and they can be very stoic and stubborn and cynical, which are kind of all earth qualities of earth signs. Very realistic and pragmatic and focused on physical reality. But at the same time, if their sign is represented as half fish, that kind of implies that maybe they're a little bit more dreamy than they let on, or maybe they do have a vivid imagination, or some kind of dream world where they can understand the water world as well, or maybe perhaps they're more emotional than Virgo or Taurus. Which is something that you might not think with Capricorn, but just their depiction kind of asks that question. Is that, maybe Capricorn does tap into those emotional realities. Also, Capricorn being the sea goat would be the only creature that could travel all the way from the depths of the ocean all the way up to the surface, climb onto shore, and then climb them all the way up to the top of the mountain. So Capricorn is the only one that can go all the way from the bottom to the very top of the mountain, which, if you know Capricorn as a sign, it says a lot about Capricorn, because they work for themselves. They have to create their own wealth and their own success, and a lot of times they come up from basically nothing, and they work, to the top of the corporate ladder or what have you. They are so determined to become successful, and they're so independent that they create that success within themselves. So, metaphorically, they do come up from the depths of the ocean to the top of the mountain. So that's another reason why they would be the sea goat. They're the only one that can make that whole journey. Another subcategory I could have done, I could have grouped Capricorn with Sagittarius, because those are the only mythical representations. All the other ones are real. They're animals or people, or twins are real. Water bearer, that could be real. Centaurs are not real. Sea goats are not real. And that could suggest that maybe these two signs are kind of larger than life. Um, they are definitely very driven, and they want something that is they want to ground into this reality something that isn't yet real. They could be very inventive, but they want like success and they want to be larger than life. Um, these are sort of the two most public signs. These are the signs of politicians and CEOs and businessmen to some extent, or people that have reputations like celebrities, actors, anyone with a large profile. So maybe, if they're both mythical, I guess they could both be, they both want to be legendary. They both want to be larger than life. They want to be the best at what they do, better than anybody, or they want to have this skill that no one else has, So it kind of says a lot about those signs in that way as well. And I feel like I didn't give some of these animal signs enough attention. Aries is the ram. The ram, like, again, whoever came up with all this is kind of genius, because the ram butts with its head. It leads with its head. Aries rules the head. Aries is the initiator, the leader. The ram leads with its head. It initiates. It's a mammal, so it's easily understood and accepted. The ram, like the goat, is also at the top of the mountain. Aries wants to be on the top. It wants to be the leader, the most successful. Same to some extent with Capricorn. It's the most visible. It's on the top of the mountain. Leo, lion, king of the jungle. You know, so yeah, I think those are pretty easy to understand. I feel like as kids, like the lion was always the king of the jungle. Very proud. They're very proud creatures. So Leo, like a group of lions is called a pride. Leo is the sign of like pride and heart and, taking care of your family or your tribe and for being the king or the queen, uh, you know. So, so yeah, I think I kind of touched on everything. Taurus is the bull. So bulls are very peaceful animals. They kind of just graze. Taurus is associated with food. It's a very stable, peaceful sign. The bull is generally very peaceful, stable, just likes to eat all day. But if you mess with the bull, you get the horns. So if anyone, if you provoke a Taurus, they generally don't like confrontation. They're peaceful, but they're not afraid of confrontation either. They will mess you up if you confront them. So same with the crab to some extent. If crabs have their shell, they're inside their shell, they're minding their own business. But if you provoke them, they'll attack you. The crab and the scorpion, or the Cancer and the Scorpio, are the only ones represented by animals with shells. So I guess invertebrates, and they're the only ones. They're the ones that have the most of a protective shell around them. That they, have to act tough because they're sensitive. They have a soft inside. They're both very emotional creatures, so they have a vulnerable, soft inside that they have to protect with an outer shell and with pinchers and whatnot sometimes. So yeah, I think I covered pretty much everything, but it's just interesting. There's a lot of other ways, I'm sure I didn't even touch a whole, there's so many different ways to look at this, and you could categorize it in a different way too, but I just thought it was interesting. It's just interesting to sort of meditate on and see the patterns between things. You could see that it's interesting, like most of the people signs are mutable. Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius are all mutable. Aquarius, so what does that say about people? Maybe we're unstable and we're prone to change our minds, prone to be open-minded and maybe a little bit gullible, but we can also be wise, so those are kind of mutable qualities. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting, thought it was worth sharing. So yep, let me know what you think, I guess. Bye.